It's also my pleasure to welcome you to the National World War II Museum's 2021 Commemoration of D-Day, in partnership with the United States Department of Defense, the Baumgarten family, and the Consul General of France in Louisiana. At this moment, I'd like to introduce Rabbi David Gerber for our invocation. You can see him on the screen.
On this date in 1944, President Roosevelt addressed the nation. He chose words of prayer to acknowledge what was happening overseas. I echo his sentiments on this day. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor. We too, on this day, rededicate ourselves to uphold the memory and blessing of those who embarked upon the long and hard road to salvation for a suffering humanity. On this day, we gather to honor courage, fortitude, and sacrifice. These members of the greatest generation whose souls were shaken by the violence of war fought for the most noble purpose, not for glory, greed, or ambition, but for freedom, faith, and goodness. Today we commit ourselves to tirelessly pursue the ideals that they fought for, to honor, teach, and lift up their sacrifice so that every generation can have the courage to stand up to bigotry and evil. Let us recognize that when the deeds of our ancestors inspire us to walk in their righteous footsteps, their memories become a blessing, a living blessing that illuminates the world throughout eternity. Zichronam livracha, may their memory be for a blessing. Ken yehi ratzon, may this be God's will. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Gerber. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in standing for the United States National Anthem performed by the Victory Bells and the French National Anthem performed by our own Dodie Piper.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Allons au fond de la patrie, le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie, l'étendard sanglant élevé, l'étendard sanglant élevé. Entendez-vous dans les campagnes mugir ces féroces soldats? Ils viennent jusque dans nos bras, égorger vos fils, vos compagnes. Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons, marchons, marchons, cassons pur, à brave nation. Aux armes, citoyens, formez vos bataillons, marchons, marchons, cassons pur, à brave nation.
Thank you. Please be seated. At this time, I'd like to greet our guests, both virtually and in person, to our ceremony commemorating D-Day, this pivotal event in world history. In addition to the global significance of June 6th, D-Day was also the original focus of the National World War II Museum and the museum's birthday. But even as we've grown beyond this singular focus, our focus on individual sacrifice in this greatest of conflicts has never wavered. As is our time-honored tradition, I'd like to individually recognize those for whom the National World War II Museum honors most. At this time, would all World War II veterans, home front workers, and Holocaust survivors please stand to be recognized? We have two with us today, Mr. Robert Lowry, who was a veteran of Omaha Beach on D-Day, 77 years ago today, and Mr. Samuel Meyer from the 9th Air Force. Gentlemen, please be recognized. Gentlemen, it's an honor to pay tribute to you and your service every day here at the museum, but especially on this day, so thank you. Let's also now recognize all veterans and active duty military. If you have served in the military at any point, please stand and be recognized. Thank you for your service and for commemorating this special day with us. I would also like to offer a very special welcome to current and past members of our Board of Trustees in attendance or viewing from home today. I'd like to recognize Dr. Nick Mueller, our President and CEO Emeritus. And I'd like to recognize the Honor Flight volunteers from Dallas-Fort Worth that are with us today. I'd also like to welcome our special guests who are joining us in person or through pre-recorded remarks. I'd like to welcome the Schurs and the representatives of the Baumgarten family. I'd like to recognize Rita Baumgarten, wife of Dr. Hal Baumgarten, for whom this ceremony is named. The Honorable Vincent Siama, Consul General of France in Louisiana. Dr. Rob Citino, Executive Director of the Institute of Study of War and Democracy, and Samuel Zamuri Stone, Senior Historian at the National World War II Museum. Try saying that 3 times fast. Thank you all for being here today and being part of our ceremony. We're grateful for your presence. At this point, I would like to welcome and bring to the stage our own Stephen Watson, the National World War II Museum's President and CEO.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Pete. It sure does feel good to be here in person, our first in-person ceremony since the pandemic, and I think it's fitting that we're here on D-Day. So as Pete said, of course, today carries special meaning for us here at the museum. Of course, it carries special meaning for our country as we commemorate the largest amphibious invasion in history and a pivotal turning point in the war in Europe. It has great significance for our city as we recall the vital role of Higgins Industries and the amphibious landing craft that were built right here in New Orleans that were critical in the success of Operation Overlord. And as Pete said, of course, it's 21 years ago today that Dr. Mueller and Dr. Ambrose and many World War II veterans and dignitaries cut the ribbon to open the National D-Day Museum. And we have a few folks, in addition to Dr. Mueller, that were here with us on that day, and I want to recognize 3 of our volunteers, Joyce Dunn, Gaston Andre, Ronnie Abu. We took a photo together this morning. It's part of our tradition, and they were here on opening day, and we're delighted that you're back here with us again on our 21st birthday. And thank you, Joyce, for keeping an eye on my son as well during the ceremony. So as I said, it's fitting that we're here today and with our first in-person audience, a major milestone, I would say, as we continue to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. Since the museum opened in 2000, there has been tremendous growth. You just have to look around and you can see it right in front of you. We've opened 6 permanent exhibition pavilions with a 7th. The Liberation Pavilion, as you can see, is coming out of the ground right now and will open towards the end of next year. The Liberation Pavilion will focus on what it means today, part of our mission statement, the Holocaust, the end of the war, the post-war era, and I think really get to the meaning of what we were fighting for and what our victory was really about, which was freedom, democracy, and human rights. And when the Liberation Pavilion opens next year, it will substantially complete a journey that we've been on for almost 20 years to make that pivot from the National D-Day Museum to the National World War II Museum. We believe building a museum fitting for such an important mission and an important story. And as Pete said, I just want to add my thanks to Mr. Myers, Mr. Lowry. It's wonderful that you're here with us today. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Mr. Lowry, I just found out, has been a Cubs fan for 86 years. He's never been to a Cubs game, and I said we can help make that happen. So he's also never been on a plane. So we're ready when you are, sir, to get you to Wrigley Field. You just tell us when. We will make that happen. But I'm delighted that both of you are here. So, of course, this 21-year journey has not been without its fair share of trials and tribulations. The past year, of course, being amongst the most challenging periods in our history. But I think we believe we continue to stand as an example of the ideals of the World War II generation, especially unity, determination, and innovation in the face of hardship. Over the past year, I think we've really embraced these values and shared our mission and our stories with audiences worldwide. And I'm proud to say that really thanks to the dedicated efforts of our team in the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy, the World War II Media and Education Center, our curators, our educators, that we're on track to set new records for digital content access amongst our audiences. As many as 12 million people expected to access our content in 2021. We have accelerated the digitization of our oral histories and collection, which of course enable us to bring new content to new audiences and of course to share the stories of the men and women that fought in World War II. This past year also marked the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II, likely the last major anniversary of the end of the war, where we will have many World War II veterans, Holocaust survivors, and homefront workers with us. And I think we believe that makes our mission even more important at the museum. We will become your storytellers to ensure that current and future generations don't forget the sacrifices that you made to preserve the freedoms that we have today. So there's a real urgency to our mission. We feel that every day here at the museum. But I think especially today, as we remember the incredible sacrifices on D-Day, and we remember the sacrifices of the D-Day veterans who really turned the tide of the war in Europe. And I think it's really fitting that we're hosting today's commemoration in memory of Dr. Hal Baumgarten, a great friend of our institution, one of the key speakers of the D-Day Museum opening 21 years ago today on June 6th. And I want to take the opportunity, you're going to hear from Hal's wife Rita in a few moments, but I want to take the opportunity to thank Rita for coming to New Orleans to record a message that you will hear in a few minutes. And also Dr. Baumgarten's daughter, Karen, and son-in-law, Leopold Scher, who are present with us this morning. Thank you for being here to represent the Baumgarten family. It's a real honor to have you with us here this morning in person. And for sponsoring our annual D-Day commemoration in Dr. Hal's memory. Thank you. It is, of course, an honor to have Dr. Hal's oral history in our collection, including his minute-by-minute personal account of landing on Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach on H hour with Company B of the 116th Regiment, 29th Infantry Division. That is also a story that is told in a special book, Everything We Have, that was written by Dr. Mueller, that was released 2 years ago on the 75th anniversary of D-Day, that really focuses on some of the amazing personal accounts of D-Day veterans from our collection. And if you have not read that book, I urge you to. You can purchase it in the museum store while you're here today. But it has been an honor to know Hal and to be with him and Rita 16 years ago today, and to hear Hal tell his story from the exact location of his landing, which was then 61 years earlier. I ate breakfast that morning with Hal and Rita. We were staying at the Churchill Hotel in Bayou, and before heading out to the beach and the American Cemetery on June 6th. Hal, as I recall, was a little different that morning. He was partly anxious. He was, as he always was, incredibly focused. But I think most of all, I could tell that he was aware of the importance of that day. Not just that he had to tell his story, but he had to make sure that he could shine a light on those that did not come back, those that were killed on that beach. And as you will see in the short excerpt of his oral history, it's something that was always central to Dr. Baumgarten. He always wanted you to know about the men that did not come back. But that morning, I knew he was focused, and I knew that this meant something incredibly, incredibly important to him and Rita. So that was a trip I will always cherish. Hard to believe that it was 16 years ago. So now we will hear virtually from Rita Baumgarten, who will discuss her husband's life of service. And following that, you will hear a short excerpt from Dr. Baumgarten's oral history. Thank you all again for being here on this very special day.
Hello, my name is Rita Baumgarten. I'm the wife of Hal Baumgarten. He was the love of my life for 67 blissful, blessed, and beautiful years. We were truly lovebirds from beginning to end. I'll bet you never met another bride that went to Arlington Cemetery on her honeymoon. No matter how much I stole his heart, there was always a special reserved spot for his Army buddies. Of course, we had to go to Arlington. Many of my memories throughout our marriage were of Hal's total dedication to mentioning his Army buddies and telling me all about them and how they perished in such horrible ways and lost their lives at young ages. He was extremely patriotic, and he continually drummed into our children to appreciate their country and never forget the price paid for their freedom. How do you summarize and capsulize memories of a man of such diverse talents and achievements into one brief note? Very difficult when there is so much to say. As you know, he was a surviving veteran of the Normandy invasion of France. To be more specific, he was in Company A, transferred to Company B just 2 weeks prior to the invasion. He was in the 116th Regiment of the 29th Division, who landed with the first wave on the Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach on that infamous date of June 6, 1944. He was only 19 years of age. There were about 30 men in his boat team, of which only 2 survived, Hal and Charlie Connors. Incidentally, Hal drew a Star of David on the back of his jacket. He was wounded 5 times, luckily managed to survive, and hoped to live a deserving life, a good life, and to help his fellow man. He always felt he owed a payback to God for sparing his life. Fast-forwarding some years, he continued on with his education in spite of many surgeries to try to put him back together. I can attest to him having terrible nightmares, and he would be agonizingly shouting, "Get down, get down." He could not stop thinking about his buddies on the green sector of Omaha Beach, gunned down, drowned, blasted to bits, horribly annihilated, red-streaked waters, sand streaked like it was painted with a red paintbrush, and he'd hear excruciating sounds of moaning and groaning and screaming, body parts strewn across the beach, guts hanging out, and the horrible, horrendous annihilation of so many buddies. He could never forget. He was the eyewitness of that massacre. He always said he saw things that no other 19-year-old should ever have to witness. To cut to the chase, after the war, he married, completed his education, and he taught at Palm Beach High School for 5 years, never ever talking about his military life. Inwardly, he always thought he was destined to do more to help his fellow man. He returned to school and got a medical degree, eventually becoming a physician. More payback to God for saving his life on D-Day. He was an outstanding physician, a caring and compassionate man. He frequently used the barter system for his patients from low-income families. We were always supplied with eggs, tomatoes, pecans, figs, and many delicious home-baked goods. He still never spoke about D-Day, except to his family. Fast forward 44 more years from 1944 to 1988. We were invited to Vierville-sur-Mer, Omaha Beach, Normandy, France, for the unveiling of a 29th Division monument. Hal did not want to go because he thought it would be too painful. But his wife insisted and persisted, and so we went. It was an emotional, tear-filled trip, to say the least, especially visiting Omaha Beach and the American Cemetery in Colville. Hal pointed out to me so many of the graves with crosses and stars of the boys that died that day. I believe there were over 2,500 American soldiers all perished on that one D-Day, June 6, 1944. On the flight over, he met his medic, Cecil Breeden. Neither of them thought the other was still alive. Can you imagine the emotions of 2 grown men shared at the moment they discovered each other had survived? 2 grown men hugging and crying, nightmarish remembrances, and now solid joy each other had made it. That was a 2-man reunion I will never forget. Once Hal discovered there were so many 29er survivors, he started to attend the 29th Division reunions. In fact, years later, he was awarded a plaque naming him the ambassador for all the fallen brothers in arms of the 29th Division of Omaha Beach. Fast forward a few more years, and the true turning point of his life began when he met Dr. Stephen Ambrose, co-founder of this museum. Dr. Ambrose had him record his story of D-Day, and Stephen thought that Hal's recall, his remembering all the buddies, and his articulation was amazing. They developed a very close friendship. Stephen definitely was his mentor. He encouraged him, he prodded him, and he urged him to talk about it, tell about it, Give speeches, write about it, and not let this history be forgotten. Hal, he said, there are historians who can do it, but you are an eyewitness to the Door Green sector of Omaha Beach. You must speak for all those boys that cannot. That is another reason that God spared you on D-Day, to keep those boys' names alive and their stories. You can do it, and you must do it. Hal worshipped Stephen. He read every one of his books. Stephen was his hero, his mentor, his advisor, and his friend. He heeded his advice. Perhaps that was his catharsis. Hal did write some books and began his passion to talk about it, to tell about it, all about the landings on Omaha Beach and D-Day, and always mentioning his buddies, his brothers in arms. Never forget my buddies. He mentioned their names, where they came from, and everything he could think of about them. Hal was the very first veteran speaker at this very museum. He spoke here many times and many years, and he continued to be involved. He was honored to speak at the 10th anniversary, too. He always ended his speeches with, "Never forget my buddies." His mission and his passion in life was to keep those names alive. He truly was a spokesman for every brave man on Door Green sector of Omaha Beach. And he said, yes, it was because they no longer could speak for themselves. He was like a poster boy for all those that made the supreme sacrifice. He always mentioned his buddies by name, names like Robert Garbett, Bedford Hoback, Robert Ditmar, Harold Donaldson, Harold Weber, Russell Pickett, Stanley Gambola, Clarence Riggs, Clarence Roberson, and I could go on, but time would forbid it. Every single speech, book, and dedication Dr. Hal ever made always included, "Never forget my buddies." The importance of Dr. Hal's legacy enduring at this museum is not just to remember his name, but to remember his purpose, all the brothers that lived and died on D-Day. Hal was like a banner waving, "Remember my buddies." Hal is gone now, but this story will live on. A humongous thank you to all my loving family, but a special thank you to my New Orleans children, Karen and Leopold Scher, for making this commemoration possible. They are amazing, good people as well. They are true believers in Honor Thy Father. Not only Dr. Hal Baumgarten, but also Leopold's dad, Joseph Scher, a Holocaust survivor. We shall never forget. And now a tremendous thank you to this museum and its wonderful staff. I want to thank Nick Mueller for his kindness, for his friendship, and his dedication over the many years. I want to thank Stephen Watson, whom we came to meet and love and adore on one of our trips to Normandy with this museum. We could see that he was an outstanding leader and a clear friend from the beginning. Also, thank you to Jeremy Collins, who stole our hearts with his outstanding care, his kindness, and concern for us over the years. We appreciate all the staff. The staff here are phenomenal. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Tom Brokaw, another dear friend who, when I lost Hal, wrote a note that said, "Hal was the greatest of the greatest generation." One more note, my opinion about this amazing museum. This museum is within itself one huge medal. It is not a gold medal. It is not a silver medal. It is not a bronze medal. No, it isn't any of those. It is not any of those. But it is a rock medal for this nation. It is one big, solid rock of a medal, and it is a rock that records, represents, respects, remembers, reveres, and really reminds and remembers at the same time. Freedom is not free. And God bless you, God bless America, and remember those buddies. Thank you.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
We had 85% casualties first 15 minutes. I was wounded 5 times.
Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well trained, well equipped, and battle hardened. He will fight savagely.
When our ramp went down, the signal for every machine gun on that beach to open up on the exit to our ship. Harold Donaldson, the lieutenant, was gunned down in the boat like you see in Saving Private Ryan. The fellow in front of me, Clarice Riggs, was machine gunned on the ramp. I dove in behind him. Only my left side of my helmet was creased by a bullet. So we were losing men right and left. The water was full of blood. There were a group of us running across the beach with our rifles at port arms, which is the rifle across your chest. When we got to about 135 yards away from the seawall, a machine gun spray came from the trenches up on the bluff, and I heard a loud thud on my right front, and my rifle vibrated. I turned it over. There was a clean hole through its receiver, which is a little rectangular plate in front of the trigger guard. My 7 bullets had stopped in the magazine section, had stopped the German bullet. Another thud behind me to the left, and that guy was gone too. I hit the sand behind the hedgehog, which is about 130 yards from the seawall, and I observed to my right Private Robert Dittmar, Fairfield, Connecticut. I was yelling. He tripped over the hedgehog, spun completely around, lying on his back and yelling, "I'm hit, I'm hit, Mom, Mother," and then he was silent. I looked over to my left, and Sergeant Clarence Robeson of Lynchburg, Virginia. I always mention their names and where they came from. I don't want people to forget about them. Clarence Robeson was staggering by me without his helmet, gaping hole in the left side of his forehead. His blonde hair was streaked with blood. I was yelling, "Get down." This used to be my nightmares. I'd be yelling, "Get down," because I never forgot that scene. And I guess he couldn't hear me anyway. The noise on that beach was horrendous. He staggered all the way behind me to the left, knelt down, and he started praying with his rosary beads. And the machine gun up on the bluff fired over my head and cut him in half.
I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory.
I was cursing that pillbox on the right flank, and a shell went off in front of me, 88 millimeter. It blew off this cheek, gave me a hole in the roof of my mouth. I had teeth and gums laying on my tongue. This jaw was shot away, left upper jaw. The cheek was flapping over my ear, and I looked into my left front, and Bedford Hoback of Bedford, Virginia, got hit with the same shell right in the face and went under the 4 inches of water. He was dead.
Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Wow. Thank you to Rita and Dr. Hal and the Schur family. France, in addition to its ties to our great state of Louisiana, is inextricably linked to the legacy of D-Day as not only the site of the invasion, but more importantly, as a site of liberation. We stand together in this commemoration as sister nations, bound by a common and enduring struggle for equality and freedom. So now I'd like to introduce and turn it over to Vincent Sciamma, the Consul General of France in Louisiana, for his remarks.
Hello, I'm Vincent Sciamma, Consul General of France in Louisiana. Last year, I addressed you with a video message because the health context in Louisiana did not permit us to gather together in person. Today again, I'm speaking to you this way because unfortunately I cannot join you today. But what a victory to be able to reunite in such an essential place of memory in New Orleans, the World War II Museum. It's such a comforting feeling knowing that you are sharing this moment in the magnificent Boeing Center to commemorate the day where everything changed. World War II is an enormous part of our collective memory. It's one of those moments and events that defines us as nations, as individuals. It owns us. It's something that passed on for generations. D-Day, for many people back then and today, resonates as the beginning of the end of World War II. The destiny of our families and the destiny of millions of families in France were transformed forever because of the courage of American soldiers that landed on the beaches of Normandy that day. It was a liberation of our country, but beyond that, it was a reaffirmation of freedom and dignity on European soil. Today is an opportunity to remind us how precious the friendship between France and the United States is. And each time we have to fight for the rights of liberty and democracy, France and the United States stand together. These ideals run deeply in our veins. Our friendship has held strong for 250 years, reinforced by the sacrifices of men and women who fought for a cause bigger than themselves. We must remember this and honor this memory. Looking back at what we've been through this last year and up until today, I cannot help but draw a comparison with our troubled times and think that we too are reaching the end of this journal. For French people, World War II brings back images of the resistance, it brings back images of hardship, the guerrilla warfare, the ambushes, the fear, but also positive images, the companionship, the incredible bravery of ordinary people who came together and in a collective effort defeated the enemy. We remain steadfast together. We resisted together. We will remember this common effort and we will commemorate it like D-Day as a celebration of mutual aid and victory over adversity. Let's hope that next year and in the following months you will be able to join us on the beaches of Normandy to celebrate all together this incredible moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sciamma. Now I'd like to introduce the museum's own Dr. Rob Citino, Executive Director of the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy, and the Samuel Zemurray Stone Senior Historian to discuss the historical context of today's ceremony.
I'll echo what everyone else has been saying. It's so good to see live human beings in a room and to be able to talk face-to-face and person-to-person. Something you would take for granted in normal times, but none of us will ever take for granted again. I call my brief remarks today a year on the beach. You know, it's been an amazing year, actually a year plus, and I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone that. As things slowly begin to return to normal, we're once again able to have personal contact and to do live events here at the museum. It seems like an appropriate time to reflect on just what the country has been through, where we've been, and where we're going to be going from here. You know, I'll add this, it seems entirely appropriate to talk about these things today on this memorable anniversary in our nation's history. 77 years ago today, as you've now heard a few times, June 6, 1944, U.S. and Allied forces landed in Nazi-occupied Europe. It was a day that called for courage, more courage than most of us in this room can possibly imagine, although there are a couple of veterans who can well imagine it here today. While it may seem odd at first, I've been thinking about courage, about the similarities between that fateful June day and what the country has been through recently, between World War II and COVID, in other words, and about the lessons that we have learned, always add hopefully.
Back in 1944, as in 2020, the country was facing a dangerous and frightening enemy. We'd been taken by surprise by a kind of sudden attack. We were, as a people, uncertain and confused at first. We had suffered and continued to suffer heavy losses, but we had weathered the initial onslaught. We recovered our confidence, and we gradually began to confront our fears more directly. Back in 1944, as in our own day, none of it came easily. The situation seemed so uncertain. Everything was apparently in flux. I think of those brave men, boys really, 19-year-old, on those Higgins boats, Hal Baumgarten, Dr. Hal, and the rest. They did not really know what to expect when the ramp went down, but they had to be ready for anything. They had to react to totally unexpected developments. They had to think and do on the fly. And hopefully, those are things we all learned to do in the past year or so. Back then, as in our own day, Americans did their duty and then some, and many proved themselves to be heroes. Hal Baumgarten and the rest of the assault force on those D-Day beaches had a job to do. They had a sense of duty. They had the guts to quite literally stare death in the face. You know, in a quieter way, we saw those same kind of characteristics, those same kind of guts all over the country in 2020 and 2021. Whether it was your local grocery store workers staying open when you needed them most. My wife and I live here in the neighborhood. Without a grocery store, it would be a very, very difficult place to live, but they stayed open. To our brave staff here on the floor of the museum, to first responders doing their thing. It was an inspiring thing in many ways to be an American in the last 12 or 18 months. I'm alive right now because first responders came to my apartment and got me to a hospital when I was having a very serious health problem. Details available upon request, as I like to say. I won't go into it. Was not COVID related, but when an ambulance comes to your apartment and the EMTs are in full hazmat gear, this was April of 2020. You know you're living in unusual times, and I was thinking of the guts of someone leaving their house in the morning, bye honey, saying to your wife or to your husband, and putting on a full hazmat suit to go to work. And those were the EMTs in my apartment that day. You know, finally, and I think this is the key, then as now, Americans refuse to despair, even in the face of a dangerous and terrifying ordeal. Every year before we stage this memorial event, I go back and I re-listen to Dr. Hal's oral history. It's a little ritual I have. You've seen pieces of it. His video interview at the museum. And it doesn't get any less dramatic, no matter how many times I hear it. You've heard Dr. Hal say this, but I want to reiterate just a couple of facts. Within the first few moments of the invasion, 28 of the 30 men on his boat are killed. He has a single friend. He and a buddy named Charles Connor are the last men standing. Hal's company as a whole suffers the monstrous total of 85% casualties in the first 15 minutes of D-Day. Hal himself is hit and wounded no fewer than 5 times in the course of the landing. 3 times on June 6th and twice more the next day. Horrible wounds, I might add, to his face and jaw and foot. He could have despaired and he could have given in. He could have sat down on the beach and refused to move. Instead, his response was to keep moving, to keep fighting, to press forward. You know, as Hal puts it so well later in the oral history, fighting was a simple matter of logic. He said, we were left with options. We could stay there and die. We could give up the beach to the Germans. We could fight wounded. Since options 1 and 2 were unacceptable, he said, we decided to fight wounded. You know, it's modest talk. It's the way real heroes talk about their heroics, almost always very, very modestly. But Hal's words are to me what D-Day was all about and what the legacy of D-Day is for all of us as Americans today. No matter how dark things might appear, never despair, never give up, never surrender. You know, I sincerely hope we never have another year like 2020 in my lifetime. But if we do, I hope we remember that we will always have heroes on whom we can look back. Guys who never gave up or gave in. Individuals who refused to let despair cloud their judgment. And who, for me, stand as the very best that America has to offer. Dr. Hal Baumgarten and all the brave men, Americans and allies, who fought alongside him on June 6, 1944, 77 years ago today. We'll never forget Hal or his buddies. Thank you very much.
At this time, we would like to take a moment of silence and the benediction.
Before our closing benediction, we take a moment of silent reflection, memory, and blessing. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, God of our ancestors, we pray that the sacrifices of those who came before us light the path for a peaceful and just world. We remain steadfast in our commitment to the pursuit of a day when nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. We pray for the strength to be our brother's keeper and recognize the divine image in all of God's creations. We strive to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly in the light of God. Adonai oz le'amo yiten, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. May God grant strength to our people. May God bless our people with peace. And let us say, Amen.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. A very special thanks to Mr. Meyer and Mr. Lowry for joining us today. As you continue your visit and explore our exhibits, I encourage you to spend some time visiting our original D-Day exhibit, the D-Day Invasion of Normandy, on the third floor of the Louisiana Pavilion. This exhibit features the watch that Dr. Hal was wearing on Omaha Beach that day. Also in the Louisiana Memorial Pavilion, near the main entrance, is a table where we invite our veterans and active duty service members to pick up a Knit Your Bit scarf in recognition of our nation's gratitude to your service. As we continue to celebrate the museum's birthday today, we're offering free cupcakes to museum visitors with the purchase of a meal as supplies last at the American Sector Bar and Restaurant. Put in my little ad there. And now please enjoy this rendition of Happy Birthday performed by the Victory Bells, who you can see again free at 12:30 right here in the US Freedom Pavilion. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at the National World War II Museum.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday from the Victory Bells. Happy birthday to you and many more. Thank you for coming today.